Futures trading involves risk and is not suitable for all investors. Content provided in this segment is meant for educational purposes and is not a solicitation to buy or sell commodities.
Hi, welcome to the October 2nd edition of Basis Loaded with Joe Schmit. I am Joe Schmit. This episode, as always, produced by Paige Driscoll. We are into the fall season. Beautiful here in Chicago. Low 70s, lots of sunshine. What better way to celebrate than the latest with the NDPSR? We'll start with this butter number 307.56. That represents a plus 5.5 to the CME 1 week average of 302.05. Plus 5.5 is above our expected basis, but you'll notice the CME 1 week was down 13 cents to get to that 302.05 here on the NDPSR, only dropping 11 cents. So a little bit of an increase in basis as prices on the NDPSR are slow to keep up with the changes that we're seeing at the CME. What's even more interesting is we traded 38 loads on the CME last week at a level even lower than the 302.05. So the fact that it was still able to carry a 5.5 cent premium with all that weight trading at the CME at a significantly lower price, certainly impressive for basis. And that 307.56 is a little bit higher than most would expect. However, on this decline, we're seeing the volume tail off a little bit. Volume here on this week's NDPSR falling short of even the 2.7 million pound mark. So definitely below our expected 3.5 million pounds on this week's report. But the manufacturer can hang their hat on the plus 5.5 cent positive basis, which, as we'll discover, is the only positive basis on this week's NDPSR report. Up next is cheese. We'll start with the blocks. 228.09. 228.09 is a minus 1 to the CME 1 week average of 228.90. That 228.90 is the high week at the CME as prices moved to the highs of the year. We are seeing some negative basis here on this week's NDPSR. We traded 8 loads at the CME last week and didn't seem to really show up here on the NDPSR. However, it should be noted that 12 million pounds is a lot of weight, although below our expected volume threshold, a lot of weight relative to recent weeks and as close as we've come to normal volume in recent weeks. So the fact that manufacturer was able to get clear at the high end of the range of victory nonetheless. Up next is barrels, 244.96. That represents a minus 3 to the CME 2 week average of 248.08. Now the barrels are still a week away from achieving their high 2 week, but of course minus 3 well below our expected basis. Now, granted, buyers seem to be a little hesitant as the values at the CME rose to new all-time highs at that 260 level. What's funny is after achieving that level, volume at the CME has been extremely light. We traded 0 barrels on the CME. So we had a whole bunch of enthusiasm at the CME, trading big volume all the way up. On the descent, poof, nothing. No buyers. Straight down on just offers. Interesting nonetheless. However, at that high NDPSR level, close to the 245 level, the manufacturer was able to move north of 12.5 million pounds. So a little bit of a decline in volume from recent weeks. You'll remember last week we achieved normal volume on the NDPSR report for the first time in a long time. This week falling 1 million pounds short of that level. However, moving north of 12.5 million pounds at the high of the year. Again, tip your cap to the barrel manufacturer on staying current and getting weight moved when the price was right. Up next is whey, 54.60. And you'll remember that's a big increase from last week's NDPSR. Call it a little bit more than a penny and a half increase. And you remember last week we were kind of expecting this increase because, of course, prices on the NDPSR report for whey are relative to prior week's NDPSR rather than the CME. So this 54.60 relative to the CME is a minus 5 to the CME 1 week average of 59.30. We traded 7 loads on the CME last week. This 5460, when you compare it relative to the September 14th prior week's NDPSR number, is a big jump over prior week's NDPSR. So NDPSR values from September 7th to September 14th moved essentially a full penny. Here, week to week, we're moving more than a penny and a half. So an outsized gain on this week's NDPSR report, and call it a penny and a half over prior week's NDPSR. Certainly a victory in price when you combine that the manufacturer was able to move almost 6.8 million pounds at that elevated level. The victory is double. So we'll call this negative basis relative to the CME 1 week average. However, as you can see, in terms of both price and volume, it was a win for the whey manufacturer on this week's NDPSR report. And then lastly, non-fat, 131.11. That is a -8. Oof, -8 to the CME 1 week average of 139.20. Now that 139.20 was the high week at the CME, so you would expect negative basis. -8 certainly qualifies. I think it's about 4 times the negative basis than we were expecting. I had this coming in anywhere from 2 to 4 under, so -8, certainly a surprise. We did trade 35 loads at the CME. It is our second runner-up in volume at the CME, with, of course, the barrel coming in last place as it traded 0 on the way down from all-time highs. Even with all that weight at the CME, last week in non-fat volume, just a little bit north of 17 million pounds. So the manufacturer was able to move some weight, had to discount to do it, and with that discount, wasn't even able to move a huge amount of product. So this is the final week, week 4, of the September pricing. September class 3 comes in at 23.34. That is a big Chicago number. 23 Michael Jordan, 34 Walter Payton. We have both Bulls and Bears all-time greats. The only thing we're missing is a Cubs all-time great. Sadly, we're missing an all-time great for the Cubs in real life as well. So 23.34 for September class 3, 22.29 for September class 4. You'll notice that class 3 has moved above class 4 and has resumed its relative basis class 3, class 4 spread. If you carry current CME equivalents out through the entire 4-week October pricing cycle, currently getting October class 3 23.15 with October class 4 at 21.12. So a $2 class 3 premium over class 4 if all things hold steady at the CME in the weeks to come. That's it for this week. On behalf of Paige, I'm Joe Schmit. Thanks so much. We'll see you next week. Bye.